Hello, fellow cyborgs. Today I'm going to be talking with you about 3 books that I recently read that were in diary format. So the first book that I read chronologically was I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. This was a buddy read with the wonderful, amazing, miraculous Alina from Marlin Alina. We actually Google Hangout Skyped about it, and at first I was really, an introvert anxiety, but it was just so much fun talking with her and rambling and getting off topic, and I would love to buddy read with her in the future. I think we're going to read a Tolkien book in the autumn, so that should be great because I need all the encouragement I can get to get through a Tolkien book. Before I get talking about this, you deserve a book haiku. Tower on the hill, Bach and Debussy softly carry in the night. So this was loved by everybody. Mercedes loves it. Kate Howell loves it. I'm sure I know other. Those are the main 2 in my brain. I was just like, they give it 5 stars. I should try this. I gave this 3 stars. I think I had too high of expectations, and I think I also thought this was going to be a lot more standard than it was. The books 1 and 2 kind of progressed, because it's divided into 3 books, progressed the way I was thinking, standard romance story a la Jane Austen or something. But then book 3 totally took me for a loop in a really interesting way, but I just wasn't ready to receive that sort of story. So I think that was unfortunately my bad, and it reflected on how the book is. Knowing now what this book actually is, I think I would love to reread it in the future, maybe in a year or so, and see how I feel about it then. Alina talked about this, and I thought it was brilliant because I hadn't picked up on it, but every time Cassandra sits down to write her story, she tells you where she is and what the weather is, and the environment in which she's physically writing the story. Let's backtrack. In case you didn't know, this is a story about Cassandra and her family, the Mortmains, who are living in poverty in an old castle in Sussex, can't remember, the English countryside. They haven't paid rent for ages. Neighbors move in to the estate where they, should be paying rent, these Americans who have inherited the estate, and they're like, oh, do we have to pay rent now? We still have no money, and could we potentially marry these blokes? That'd be nice. There are a lot of really interesting characters in here. Topaz was great. She's an ex-artist model, and she likes to commune with nature naked in the rain outdoors. Rose was really interesting. That's Cassandra's sister, who's just hates poverty. She would almost go into prostitution instead of continue on in her poverty. And then Cassandra's father wrote 1 book that was hugely popular in America, but has wrote nothing since. I also found a lot of this to be socially awkward, and I didn't realize at the time when I was reading it. I tried watching the movie adaptation after I finished this, and it was so cringeworthy awkward that I actually couldn't get through it. So this is just a really weird book that comes off as something really just forgettable and standard, but is actually doing a lot of really interesting things. I wasn't expecting it to do those things, so I really wasn't giving it its full due attention and respect, which means that I need to go back and reread this at a later date. But those were my thoughts on this 3-star book, and this was kind of a pity 3-star because I wanted to give it 5, but for me, so I ended up just giving it 3, unfortunately. But I'm really glad that I read it and got it out of my system. The mystery is no longer there, and I'm so glad that I buddy read it as well. The next book I want to talk to you about is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. This was also a buddy read. This was a buddy read with Michaela Rashilla from a channel of the same name and Hillary from Your Robot Friend, and I had such a fun time chatting with them over Voxer. I learned how to use Voxer because of them, so that's exciting because now I'm a legitimate buddy reading booktuber person. And I'm really glad that Michaela asked me to join the buddy read group, because if she hadn't, I probably wouldn't have got to this yet, because like I said when I was talking about this on my Christmas Christmas wish list, I was pretty sure this was going to be awesome and I was going to love it, so I was in no hurry to get to it, and I was so right. I love this. I gave it 5 stars. Before I talked about why, book haiku, because it's for you. As the crow flies east, plastic bobs along the ways, touches oyster sands. So this narrative starts out with Ruth, a writer on a small island on the west coast of Canada, finding a lunchbox and myriad other things in a plastic bag on the shore. When she opens it up, she finds Now's diary. So we get the narrative of Ruth and her life and reading of Now's Diary. And we also get Now's Diary. In Now's Diary, which is like technically when it's how it's displayed in here, it's like it was translated and transcribed by Ruth, the author in the narrative. So there are footnotes and appendices, and that was made it a really interesting reading experience. I don't know how this would translate as an audiobook successfully. I know Michaela originally listened to it as an audiobook, and she found that reading it a second time was like just as enjoyable, but I can't imagine this story as an audiobook really, and I'm so glad that I physically read it. At first, when I was reading this, I was super not on board for Ruth's narrative. Parallels between Ruth as a character and Ruth as an author really bothered me. I was just hung up on, is this an autobiography? If it is, what? If it's not, why make it sound like that? Michaela thought about it really interestingly as like this is a play with like author and their creations and the relationship between that. But at the beginning of the story, I was just like, I just want a fun, interesting narrative. But as this continued on, I found great value in Ruth's side of the narrative and the Canadian culture, which is very close to the Canadian culture where I'm living. So that was a lot of fun to read about. It was interesting to read about such a remote island and such a small population and how they deal with storms and everything like that. So at the end, I enjoyed both sides of the narrative equally for different reasons. Now's narrative was I loved learning about the Japanese culture and her grandma and Buddhism, and it was so interesting, and it got progressively darker, which I really didn't think it was going to, but the tone of Now's Diary drastically changed from the beginning, where she's recounting things, to when she's recording things that are happening presently in her life. It gets really dark really quickly. I was just incredibly impressed with this. I enjoyed it so much, and there was such like craft and subtlety in here. I just loved it, and I will be rereading this at one point. And if anyone is interested in getting into Japanese culture, I will thrust it into their hands, because this is a wonderful primer. Super easy to read, super interesting, and just super. It was just super. I loved it. It was grand. 5 stars, unquestioningly 5 stars. And the final book I want to talk to you about today is Emma Tupper's Diary by Peter Dickinson. You may have heard this when I was in the video of my genre-a-thon and author-a-thon wrap-up video, because I talked about this a little bit. I gave this 1 out of 5 stars, unfortunately. But before I continue, I will give you a book haiku. Sibling rivalry, Victorian submarine, misleading title. So this book was kindly sent to me for review by Small Beer Press. This is actually from Big Mouth House, which I think is an imprint of Small Beer Press, or it's, like a sibling company. This was originally published in 1971, but this edition came out in 1914, and it has cover and interior illustrations by Kathleen Jennings, which I really did like. Her interior illustrations actually kind of remind me of Noelle Stevenson, Noelle Stevenson, blub, 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 blub. Thank you very much, Small Beer Press, for giving me the opportunity to read this. I very much appreciated it, and though I didn't love this book, it was a lovely learning experience. That was good. So I gave this 1 out of 5 stars because it didn't do what I was expecting, and it was kind of boring. So on the back, this says that Emma is spending her summer in Scotland with cousins, and she wants to win the school prize for the most exciting, interesting summer vacation diary, and her cousins are experimenting with an old mini submarine to see if they can find a monster in the family lock. Now, I'm going to spoil this a little bit. I'm not going to spoil like the climax, but I'm going to spoil like the first half. So her cousins are actually tinkering with the family submarine because their hair tonic company is going under due to South American political issues, and they are playing around with the submarine to fake a Loch Ness monster. It's not Loch Ness, but to fake a monster in their lock to draw publicity back to their family home and estate. That's why they're playing around with the submarine. It's not for some, anthropological, let's find these monsters, no. They're doing it because these rich people are going to be running out of money, and they need some sort of ploy to get people onto their land, paying for tourist stuff, what have you. That's why they're dicking around with the submarine, okay? So, not already not what it says. I was expecting this to be her talking about Scotland and the people, and then a little bit about the submarine and the lock, but Scotland was almost completely forgotten in here. A lot of this narrative's taken up by the like detailed mechanics of the submarine. For instance, I marked a page that really infuriated me. Emma's older cousin Andy is explaining things to her in the submarine, and he says, "Now, Cousin Emma, I'm going to have to tell you how this ship works. I may tell you things you already know, but don't stop me, or I might leave something important out which you don't know. But for heaven's sake, stop me if there's anything you don't understand." Which, to me, was just like, okay, reader, sit down. I'm going to detail you the mechanics of this Victorian submarine you don't give a care about, but you're going to have to sit through it because Emma's going to have to sit through it. This very much felt like Peter Dickinson went on a trip to Scotland, got really into Victorian submarines and a little bit into photography, and decided to just mash those three interests of his together into a narrative. But he spent so much time on the mechanics of this Victorian submarine. There was a way too detailed scene of how, like old film photography print happened. There's also this one scene where they have to like climb into and out of this cave. That's not a big spoiler. And like, this is an exciting adventure scene, and he's detailing like how they put the footholds in and where the handhelds went. And it was just so mechanical and so just boringly detailed. It infuriated me. There were some adventure aspects of this that were just made dull by the way that Peter Dickinson wrote the narrative. I was just not impressed at all. There are also some things in here that I completely didn't agree with. There's this young woman living with the cousins and Emma at this house named Hoop. That's her, Nincompoop is her nickname, but they play with her bathroom scale to make her freak out about her weight, because apparently she's the sort of woman who will like binge on donuts one day and then like keep her weight down the other. And so they're helping her not overeat by dicking around with her scales. And I'm just like, not okay. Also, a lot of the time in this narrative is taken up by a stupid sibling rivalry between two of Emma's cousins. Like, so the actual main plots, like the word amounts in here, is about the sibling rivalry and the Victorian submarine. Not what I wanted. So this just wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. Also, misleading title, as I mentioned in the book Haiku. So this actually isn't Emma Tupper's diary. Each chapter starts out with like half a line of like, "Yesterday was surprising," wrote Emma Tupper. And then there's this like paragraph describing about like where she's writing, what she's writing, and then it just switches to third person narrative. So it's not a diary format at all. It's just a narrative under the guise of a diary format. So nope. Not for me. So these are the 3 diary books that I recently read. I hope you enjoyed my quick little mini reviews of them. Please let me know in the comments down below if you are interested in reading any of them, or if you have any other diary format stories, books that you think I would love to read, because I love the epistolary sort of, way that a story is written, whether through letters or diaries. So if you have recommendations, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and yet again, thank you Small Beer Press for sending Emma Tupper's diary to me. Until next time, go write your own diary and continue to be lovely.